Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. The winter of 1998 was particularly harsh in the sleepy town of Coldwater, Michigan. Frost clung to window panes like a stubborn reminder of an unforgiving season, and the sparse light of the sun barely broke through heavy gray clouds. The townsfolk, accustomed to the quiet dread of the long nights, could hardly have anticipated the storm that was about to shatter their peace. On a bleak Wednesday morning, the stillness was punctured by the sharp ring of a telephone inside the Coldwater police station. Officer Delaney, a determined but somewhat weary cop with a few decades of experience behind her, picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end was frantic, breathless with panic. A local woman, Susan Karter, had not returned home the previous night, and her husband, Mark, was growing increasingly frantic with worry. They had been married for nearly 10 years, and Susan had never vanished this way. Mark's emotional fragility was evident as he explained that Susan had gone out to run errands. She was supposed to return by dinner, but as that time came and went, darkness engulfed their home, taking with it any semblance of normalcy. Delaney took detailed notes, her gut telling her that something was terribly wrong. As she gathered information, the reality began to sink in. Susan Karter was missing. In a town where everyone knew each other, the implications of such a case sent shivers down Delaney's spine. This was to be the beginning of an investigation that would rock Coldwater to its core, unraveling a tangled web of secrets and lies hidden beneath its idyllic facade. The victim. The following day, Officer Delaney arrived at the Karter residence. The house stood modestly at the end of Maple Street, peering out nervously from behind a white picket fence. The snow crunched beneath her feet as she walked up the path, the air thick with the scent of pine and the flourishing gossip carried by neighbors peering through their curtains. Just 2 days prior, it had been like any other day, a mother preparing breakfast for her children, a devoted wife engaging in small-town banter. Now, the silence inside was deafening. As she stepped inside, Delaney's eyes were drawn to the warmth that still lingered in the home. Family photos adorned every surface. Susan smiling with her 2 children, Sarah and Ethan, during a summer picnic. The family beaming on the day of their wedding. Space, overwhelmed by the stark contrast. Delaney steeled herself, reminding herself of her duty. Despite the home's inviting atmosphere, darkness loomed close. Delaney observed the cluttered kitchen where lunchboxes sat, untouched, still residing on the table from the morning rush. It was a stark reminder of the life that had suddenly been upended. Nearby, a half-open drawer caught her attention, filled with unopened mail and tangible signs of Susan's mundane existence. It seemed to mock the horror of her disappearance. Mark Karter entered the room, his gaze hollow and haunted. He was a man in disbelief, his grief palpable, but there was something deeper lurking behind his eyes, a flicker of frustration. She wouldn't just leave. She had too much to lose, he insisted, struggling to maintain composure. Delaney noted the tremor in his voice, cataloging reminders of a rocky discussion she would need to pursue later. As she probed him for details about their life together, flashes of obedience and tension revealed themselves. The couple had been seen in public as the perfect family, but Mark's claims of Susan's devotion were quickly belied by whispers of dissatisfaction hidden among their friends. Here in this stark realization lay the compass guiding her investigation, a woman lost amid love, anxiety, and secrets sharper than any winter wind. The crime scene. As Officer Delaney left the Karter residence, she felt the weight of Susan's absence pressing heavily on her shoulder. The growing uncertainty gnawed at her, prompting her to return to the precinct and begin the arduous task of piecing together the fragments surrounding Susan's disappearance. With the tip of her finger hovering over a map of Coldwater, she focused her attention on the supermarket where Susan had last been seen. Hours later, she stood at the entrance to McAllister's Market, a local staple known for its friendly staff and homey charm. The shelves that once bustled with shoppers now stood eerily quiet, illuminated by the flickering fluorescent lights. Delaney approached the cashier, an elderly man with a wizened face, who recognized her immediately. "You're here about Susan, right?" he asked, a cloud of sympathy in his eye. After showing her badge, he led her to the back office, where they'd reviewed security footage earlier that morning. In the grainy images, Delaney could finally see Susan, an expectant smile etched on her face as she strolled down the aisles. The timestamp read 5:30 p.m., just hours before her family expected her home. As Delaney observed the footage closely, she noted the quality of Susan's demeanor. She didn't appear anxious or rushed. In fact, she seemed almost serene as she picked out fresh vegetables and a few treats for her children. No signs of struggle or indication that something was amiss. But just as the video neared its close, something caught Delaney's eye, a man lingering in the background. With a steady hand, Delaney paused the footage, focusing on the stranger wearing a dark hoodie that obscured his identity. There was a broken quality to his appearance, his stance caught between hurry and hesitation. A quick exchange occurred between the man and Susan as she passed by, their interaction just fleeting enough to be benign but unsettling all the same. Delaney's instincts were on high alert. There was a mystery lingering in the man's demeanor, hidden in that moment of faint recognition. She turned to the cashier, asking him if he recalled anything unusual in a conversation or behavior that might have drawn his attention. As he struggled to remember, Delaney felt the first stirrings of clarity. Each detail mattered, and somehow, this enigmatic figure might hold the key to unraveling the truth behind Susan Karter's disappearance. The early investigation. With the grainy footage imprinted in her mind, Delaney shifted her focus back to the precinct, eager to delve deeper into the investigation. The following day unfolded like a series of tasks on a checklist stone laid after another, each weaving into the intricate fabric of scholarship and instinct she had honed over the years. First on her agenda was a visit to the local barbershop, a hub of information where men gathered for haircuts and gossip. Situated just a few blocks from the Karter home, it was frequented by residents who often knew every nuance of the lives around them. Delaney was welcomed by Roger, the shop owner and self-appointed guardian of neighborhood secrets. "Roger," she began, motioning him over as she half sat on a nearby stool. "I need to know if you've seen or heard anything about Susan Karter's disappearance." Roger wiped his razor on a cloth, narrowing his eyes in thought. "Of course I heard. Tragic, really. She was a good mile away, came in to get her kid's hair cut." But now, his voice trailed off as he leaned closer. "I did catch sight of a fella loitering outside McAllister's Market the day she went missing. Looked a bit off, like he didn't belong." Delaney's heart raced, the mention of the man from the footage weaving into Roger's observations. "What did he look like?" she pressed. Roger described a tall man, disheveled and unkempt, with unshaven stubble and a tendency to glance over his shoulder. "I didn't think much of it at the time, but I've seen him around before. Just don't know where." With this nugget of information, Delaney hurried to gather any available records of similar disturbances in the area. As she cross-referenced reports in the precinct's database, one name repeatedly emerged: Jake Mitchell, an ex-tenant of a local halfway house known for his volatile behavior and brushes with the law. Deciding to track him down, Delaney enlisted the help of a couple of uniformed officers to run a background check and locate a current address. They discovered he had recently moved away from the vicinity, but had strong ties back to the old neighborhood. Rumors of a tumultuous past and the odd burst of violence whispered like leaves in the autumn breeze. For Delaney, the disparate pieces was linking to an unsettling picture. Jake Mitchell, once a shadow in Coldwater's periphery, now loomed larger than life. The walls of suspicion began to close in, solidifying her resolve to find out just how he could relate to Susan's sudden disappearance. She had a name, a face. Now all that remained was to bring him into the light. The dead ends. The cold grip of February settled firmly over Coldwater, wrapping the town in a layer of frost that seemed to dampen spirits as much as it did the earth. Delaney plunged deeper into her investigation, following leads about Jake Mitchell with a fervor that bordered on obsessive. Yet, each dead end she encountered was more disheartening than the last. Officers scanned the neighborhood where Jake had supposedly holed up, only to uncover that he had vanished from his last known address, a rundown apartment complex, littered with faded memories and transient lives. Interviews with the building's residents provided little comfort, each one shrugging off questions, their eyes glazed with indifference. "I ain't seen him in a while," one tenant muttered, seemingly uninterested in the drama unfolding in front of him, the weight of apathy clinging like smoke in the air. With the clock ticking, Delaney was left feeling increasingly isolated. Door clerks, neighbors, and family friends shuffled through the tangled web of leads. Each met with the same refrain. They had heard nothing significant, no details connected like the missing pieces of a puzzle. Then, unexpectedly, an unexpected lead materialized in the form of a witness who stepped forward. An elderly woman who had occasionally run errands for Susan spoke haltingly about a recent encounter. There was a man. He was tall, with messy hair. He followed her outside. Delaney's pulse quickened. The familiar flicker of hope ignited once more. Yet when pressed for details, the elderly woman caught herself, her memory clouded by years. "I'm not sure, it's all blurry, but I know she didn't look frightened. It wasn't enough." As the desire for resolution burned within her, Delaney plowed forward, but the obstacles multiplied. Officers were dispatched to track down Jake Mitchell's old friends and associates, only to discover that his past relationships had crumbled like dust, leaving little trace behind. Delaney's sense of urgency expanded, morphing into frustration alongside the growing tension in Coldwater. Susan was still missing, and each failed lead felt like chains tightening around her resolve. Days turned into more days, and the cases that seemed so clear at the outset were layered with uncertainty. With every fleeting moment, the innocent life hanging in the balance grew more precarious, lost within the riffraff and shadows of a town that had become all too familiar with dark secrets. A break in the case. Just as winter began to show signs of thawing, Officer Delaney felt the icy grip of despair become suffocating. Each passing day leaned heavier on her like a weighty shroud, the case hovering over her like dark storm cloud. Yet, amid the mounting frustration, a glimmer of hope flickered when two officers returned to the precinct after a lead seemed to finally break through the suffocating cold. Delaney sat at her desk with a cup of lukewarm coffee, eyes glazed over the case files scattered around her, When Officer Mills approached, a wave of urgency radiating from him. "We may have found something," he said, his eyes gleaming like he had just unearthed a hidden treasure. They had tracked down Jake Mitchell's whereabouts to a dilapidated house on the outskirts of Coldwater, a crumbling structure that had long been lost to time and neglect. Mills had discovered a known associate of Jake, a figure named Samora Jackson, who claimed to have seen him at the residence within the last 48 hours. With the sun sinking on the horizon, Delaney gathered her most trusted team to launch an operation. As dusk settled in, they arrived at the mysterious house, shaky beams of light piercing through the gloom. The structure leaned dangerously, holding secrets within its decaying walls. The air reeked of mildew and something more sinister, an unshakable sense of foreboding. Delaney felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, her instincts igniting with purpose. They encircled the property, searching for any signs of life, when a flicker of movement caught Delaney's attention through a grimy window. Crouching low, she signaled to her team, and moments later, they stormed inside. The musty air was filled with silence, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath their heavy boots. "Clear," one officer called, their flashlight beams illuminating the shadows until they reached the kitchen, where they found a chilling sight disarray, littered with uneaten takeout and strewn belongings, hinting that someone had recently occupied the place. Then, as Delaney turned a corner, her breath caught in her throat. There, crouched and pale, was Jake Mitchell himself, caught like a startled animal. "Get your hands up!" Delaney shouted, her weapon drawn, heart racing as she stared down the man she believed was tangled in Susan's disappearance. Mitchell's eyes, wild and desperate, darted around the room before he complied, reluctantly raising his hands in surrender. As he was handcuffed and led away, Delaney's pulse raced with the pregnant promise of revelation. With Jake Mitchell now in custody, the shadows of Coldwater threatened to unveil their darkest secrets, giving Officer Delaney the chance she so ardently sought, a chance to confront the truth behind Susan Karter's disappearance. The suspect. The atmosphere within the Coldwater police station was charged with a nervous anticipation as Jake Mitchell sat in an interrogation room. The stark walls bore witness to countless confessions and darker truths. But tonight, they would serve as the backdrop for a confrontation that could unravel the mystery of Susan Karter's disappearance. Delaney entered the room, her expression steely and focused. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead illuminated Jake's gaunt face, shadowing the deep-set lines etched into his skin, remnants of a life marred by choices and consequences. He glared with defiance, the weight of apprehension and adrenaline swirling together in an almost palpable tension. "Jake," Delaney started, her voice steady, compelling him to engage. "You were seen near the supermarket the day Susan went missing. It's time to talk." He leaned back in the chair, a glimmer of anger flashing across his face. "What do you want me to say?" "I didn't do anything." Delaney chose her words carefully, maintaining eye contact, drawing from the exhaustive evidence she'd gathered. "It was last seen leaving that store, and the cashier described you lingering nearby. You and I both know that isn't a coincidence." Jake's bravado began to wane, but the edges of his memory were jagged and unclear. "Look, I was just waiting for a friend. I didn't even talk to her," he stammered. Yet desperation dripped from his tone. "Then tell me about this friend," Delaney pressed, leaning closer, watching the way his breath quickened. "We've done our homework, Jake. We know your history, your connections to drugs and violence. We know you were struggling. Was Susan an opportunity for you?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and charged. Jake's demeanor shifted. His bravado cracked, revealing his vulnerability. "I didn't hurt her. I swear it. I'm nothing but a loser, and even I wouldn't do that," Delaney pressed on. "But witnesses saw you following her outside the market, Jake." Susan's life was intertwined with so many others. You're not the only one who knew her. You can't hide from the truth. His eyes darkened and he flinched as if suddenly realizing that the walls were closing in. "I don't know anything. I wish I did, but I saw her cry before she went out, and I just watched from a distance. I swear." A silence draped over the room, ominously thick while Delaney processed his fragmented words. "Crying?" she echoed, her heart racing. If he was telling the truth, perhaps Susan had been exposed to other threats, other secrets lurking in the shadows. Other secrets lurking in the shadow. In the dim light, Jake's composure slipped away entirely, panic flooding his voice. "I didn't follow her to hurt her. I couldn't help myself. I thought someone might hurt her, and I wanted to protect her, I swear." Delaney sensed a fracture in his narrative, a glimpse of a greater truth behind his irregular facade. She tightened her grip on the edge of the table, knowing this was a turning point in the investigation. The truth was dangerously close, drawing tighter threads between the victims and suspects as the shadows of Coldwater began to deepen. The trial. Months rolled by after the stirring revelations in the interrogation room, yet the weight of Susan Karter's disappearance still loomed heavily over the community of Coldwater. Jake Mitchell, now charged with her abduction, was set to stand trial, the culmination of an investigation that had unveiled secrets, misconceptions, and the harsh realities of a troubled life. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Flanked by his defense team, Jake appeared uneasy, his once defiant demeanor now overshadowed by dread. Delaney sat among the onlookers, her heart racing with a mixture of determination and anxiety. The stakes had never felt higher, and she could sense the community's collective breath being held tightly, waiting for the scales of justice to tip. As the trial began, the prosecution laid out its case methodically, painting a narrative that cleverly interwove witness testimonies and the pivotal evidence gleaned from the investigation. The footage from the supermarket was played, illuminating Jake loitering in the background, his presence as haunting as the shadows that lurked behind him. The familiar faces of family and friends filled the courtroom, their expressions betraying the grief that had been woven into their lives since that fateful day. Delaney listened intently as each witness took the stand, recounting their interactions with Susan, their observations of Jake, each recounting, adding weight to the prosecution's theme of impending menace. Yet, as the days stretched into a week, the willingness of some witnesses to speak in open court became a knot of tension. The defense team employed calculated moves, seeking to discredit motivations and cast doubt on the testimonies, raising the occasional murmur among spectators. Then came the day Delaney had been waiting for, the moment when she would take the stand. She could feel the weight of the room's anticipation settling over her like a heavy cloak. As she recalled the details of her investigation, recounting moments that had built the case against Jake, she felt a mix of justice and vulnerability wash over her. The eyes of the jury were fixated on her, absorbing the gravity of her words as she bravely shared the emotional toll this case had wrought. But nothing could prepare her for the defense's counter, sharp, calculated questioning that sought to undermine her credibility. "Officer Delaney," Jake's lawyer began, a smirk creeping onto his face, You claim you were certain Jake Mitchell posed a threat to Susan Karter. Yet there's no direct evidence linking him to her disappearance, is there? Just your assumptions? Delaney held her ground, fury rising in her chest as she recalled the chilling atmosphere of uncertainty hanging over Coldwater. The absence of evidence does not exonerate him, she shot back. The conviction in her voice echoing through the courtroom. The context of his actions, his history, and the careful way he monitored Susan at all points to a sinister underlying motivation. Days turned into what felt like an eternity, but the jury finally retreated to deliberate, the fate hanging like an exposed thread. Delaney leaned back in the courtroom chair, vibrating with the gravity of the moment. Every soul in that room yearned for closure, yet the essence of uncertainty clung like autumn leaves clinging to bare branches. When the jury returned, the anticipation was almost unbearable. The verdict resounded like a thunderclap filled with complexity, not guilty. Each word hung in the air, a crisp betrayal that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Shock rippled through those present, disbelief intertwined with the bittersweet reality that justice had eluded them. As Jake left the courtroom, Delaney felt her heart shatter alongside the hopes of a grieving community. Coldwater would carry the scars of this trial on its back like heavy shadows, and the search for Susan's truth had only just begun as whispers of other lives entangled in darkness persisted, urging her to push forward. The aftermath. The aftermath of the trial felt like a slow unraveling of tapestry, fraying at its edges, where once vibrant threads of hope began to blend into a murky haze of grief and confusion. The residents of Coldwater drifted through their daily lives, but the haunting absence of Susan Karter lingered like a ghost within the familiar landscape. In the weeks following the verdict, Officer Delaney found herself haunted, not just by the loss of a vital witness, but also by the enormity of what remained unresolved. The once bustling police station felt quieter, the weight of unresolved cases thickening the air. Coldwater had settled into a disconcerting rhythm, as if holding its collective breath, waiting for something, anything to shift. Delaney poured herself into her work. Each morning welcomed the bitter chill of winter, but also the stubborn sunlight that struggled to break through gray clouds. Her desk was cluttered with cases old and new, but it was always Susan's case that pulled at her thoughts like an insistent whisper. Over coffee-hardened mornings and late evenings, she compiled every lead, every detail, hoping that the right question might surface or the right witness might come forward. One evening, as she sifted through case files, an anonymous tip arrived via a handwritten note, slipped under the precinct door. Check the woods by Lake Avalon. The words sent a shiver through her spiniest signal, flaring against the backdrop of despair. The note itself offered no source. A phantom of hope drifted through the grip of darkness. As Delaney prepared for another late-night excursion to Lake Avalon, she decided to take along Officer Mills. The closer they got to the lake, the more she felt a sense of relentless determination. "It feels like something's waiting for us there," she told Mills, pawing through the untamed underbrush. It's hard to shake the feeling that she's still nearby, somewhere. Arriving at the lake, the moonlight cast an otherworldly glow across the frozen surface. Together, they began to search the perimeter, their flashlights dancing across the shadow. As the night pressed on, Delaney's heart raced with anticipation, but the hush of the woods enveloped them, leaving only the sound of icy winds. Just as despair began to creep back in, Mills shouted, A glimmer caught their eye, a small, weathered object partially obscured by the brush. As they approached, Delaney's pulse quickened. Kneeling down, she uncovered a silver locket, its surface tarnished by the elements but indelibly marked with familiarity. Inside, a faded photograph, Susan smiling, surrounded by her children. No Delaney breathed, anxiety mounting in her chest. If this was evidence, it meant something must have happened here. But would it point to Jake or someone else entirely? The gears of darkness began to shift in a new direction as they returned to the precinct. The weight of the locket felt heavier in her pocket, its significance larger than itself, an anchor pulling her back into the storm. Delaney resolved then. With every ounce of resolve in her being, she would not yield. The case would not die with Susan's name in vain. The truth would be fought for with everything she had. In a town steeped in silence, Delaney vowed to search until those shadows faded and answers emerged, believing fervently that closure was not just a distant echo, but a tangible reality waiting just beyond the horizon. Reflection. As the winter chill thawed into the hints of spring, Officer Delaney found herself reflecting on the metamorphosis that had occurred in Coldwater since Susan Karter went missing. The quiet town, which had once felt reassuring and innocent, now sat shrouded in uncertainties and whispers, as if the very breath of life had been altered by tragedy. Late one night, she meandered through the streets, the familiar surroundings transforming into poignant reminders of a loved one lost. Every street corner churned with memories of laughter, joy, and now a sharper undercurrent of pain. As she passed the park where Susan had once taken her children to play, a tightening in her chest recalled not just the absence of a mother, but the rippling effects on the lives she had touched. Delaney thought of the countless hours spent dissecting the pieces of the investigation, each fragment connecting to the echoes of Susan's laughter in the community and the silent bow of her children, waiting like lost souls for answers that danced elusively around them. This wasn't merely about a case anymore. It had become personal, steeped in the desire to uncover the truth for Susan, for her children, and for the healing that had been delayed. As Delaney stood there, a renewed vigor coursed through her veins. The pursuit of justice was not just a professional obligation, it was a calling to be the voice for those silenced, a belief that no life, no matter how small, should remain unnoticed. Each cold night that had stretched into endless hours, now seen to pulse with the potential for light, for resolution. They would find Susan Karter at least bring the answers that her loved ones had. Perhaps some stories remained unfinished, steeped in unresolved chaos. But Delaney's heart resonated with the hope that the echoes of a life led with love would one day find peace, if not in this life, then perhaps in the next.